Hey folks, welcome back to the Mac and Mike show. Mike posted something on Facebook that I read and I thought was incredibly intelligent. That doesn't happen very often when I'm talking about Mike. So I thought maybe we would talk about that just a little bit. As you all know, Mike is an Air Force veteran, and he posted something about how to handle the current circumstances that we have in the Strait of Hormuz. And I read over it, and as I read it, I said, you know what, Mike's got a really good idea here. Do you want to explain it for the folks?
Well, yeah, it might sound like a knee-jerk reaction, but I said what we need is a 500-mile buffer zone between the Strait of Hormuz and Tehran, which is 680 miles inland from there. And back during the first Gulf War, we created these north and south fly zones, 220 miles in the south and 99 miles in the north. We didn't need that much room because we were only dealing with Scud missiles, and we were basically trying to keep their helicopters. They didn't have any jets left out of the area and able to attack. But with the incoming drones and missiles, we need enough time to intercept with whatever technology we're going to use. Because if we start putting, some people have suggested we put troops in Carg Island. And if we do that, the first thing that's going to come under attack is our soldiers, and we don't want that. But then I don't know how many miles it is from Carg Island to the narrowest point near Oman around the Strait of Hormuz, but we need that time for intercept. And you want to evacuate the civilians, which is going to be very difficult because most coastal areas in any country are highly populated.
Yes.
And then we just make it so that anything that moves within that 500-mile radius around the Strait of Hormuz is a no-go zone. So you just kill anything that moves that looks suspicious. And it wouldn't take too long, I don't think, before the Iranians gave up at that point, because you're going to cause a lot of problems moving that many people. They've already got terrible problems with their infrastructure, delivering food to the people. And the goal is not to hurt the people. So you can't create refugees for a long period of time,
Sure.
or that starts. But I think within a short period of time, that would be a potential solution.
Well, the whole idea behind what you're proposing is that even though we have a memorandum of understanding, and one of the first points of the MOU was the Straits of Hormuz would be free flowing for all traffic. In exchange for that, the United States was going to remove some of our blockade of their ports. In addition to that, we were going to do some things to allow them to have access to some of their frozen assets, their frozen money, and also allow ships to go to their ports. But the first thing they did is they violated that memorandum of understanding by attacking, I think it was at least three different cargo ships
Yeah.
from various nations who were trying to transverse the Straits of Hormuz. So what your suggestion would do is eliminate all the weapons close enough to give us that they could launch weapons without us reacting to and taking them out of the sky.
Yeah, it's just that simple. Now, in practicality, I don't know because I was not, a planner. I did some planning, like ingress and egress routes for fighter pilots and others who might get shot down within a given zone. But at that time, we were dealing with Afghanistan, which was the southern portion was a basic barren wasteland anyway. So it wasn't like you had to move a lot of people out of the way. This is a little different, but I don't know how you would begin to do it. Obviously, you would tell people move back. You do that by radio and leaflet drops or whatever technology you have at the time. It wouldn't take long for people to get the idea. And you give them time to pack up their belongings. You have to remember there's sick people, there's elderly people. And the goal, everybody keeps busting on Trump for this, but the goal is he doesn't want to hurt the civilian populace. There,
Exactly.
a lot of innocent people.
Yep.
And that's the way it is in most of our conflicts. Not every Afghan was a bad person. Not every Iraqi was a bad. We're just regular people trying to go about our daily business and get things done.
And that explains his reluctance to take out the dual purpose infrastructure,
Yes,
the
roads,
bridges
bridges,
and
electrical.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Because ultimately, although it does put a significant drag on the enemy's potential for attack, it also dramatically impacts the civilian population.
Yeah, and then you have to think about the rebuild process, which it's got to be limited. That's what I mean. You can't destroy like a whole bridge, maybe just an access to it or something like that to stop the flow. Um,
But when you do something like that, you create all kinds of ancillary problems. For example, one of the targets might be the desalinization plants,
mhm,
but then they don't have any water.
right.
Not having any water to drink in that part of the world is a significant problem.
It's a death sentence in
Yes,
3 days.
yes. The other problem is how do you feed them and keep them, comfortable within a human being's typical tolerance for the weather. So I understand Trump's reluctance to do such a thing. He does not want to hurt the civilian population, but he does want to get to a deal. And right, what is he demanding? He's demanding no nuclear program. And interesting to me, Trump said the other day, we came out with this memorandum of understanding. The first point is that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. He said as soon as they signed the deal, they went out and talked to the press
Mhm.
and said, "We never talked about that." So, what he said was these people are crazy. They're not dealing from a position of honesty. He said it in a much more vulgar or direct way, but basically what he said is you can't trust them. What do you do with an enemy that you cannot trust?
Yeah, well, that's been the problem since the beginning. I don't even think Trump is naive enough to think that there was ever a deal that you could strike with him that would hold up over time. I think he knew that they were just going to do this, and he's trying to show the world, look, I'm trying to be the peaceful guy here. I'm trying to save people. I'm not trying to be overly aggressive. Nobody wanted them to have a nuke, not even the Europeans, not the Gulf neighbors. It just would have started a nuclear arms race in the Middle East, which is the last thing we want, right?
Not only would have caused a nuclear arms race, Mike, but as he said the other day when he was talking about our opponent, he's he said that if they had a nuclear weapon, they would in fact use it.
Yeah,
And it's hard. It's very hard to not believe that very striking statement.
right. That's hard for Americans to understand that don't understand or haven't studied the mindset of the mullahs and the IRGC types that are fanatics. Um, in America, the only thing I guess we came close enough to is like, what was it, Jim Jones, who convinced a bunch of people. And then there was that other cult, the Davidian cult,
Branch Davidians.
Branch Davidians. But,
Yeah, the difference there is I don't think the Branch Davidians wanted to
no, they
end their
didn't.
lives. I think that Janet Reno and the American government
But,
decided to end a bunch of lives.
right.
That was a different kind of problem.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, in general, we know about cults.
Yes,
And so, we can only understand it in America on a small scale.
right.
But imagine if any one of the cults that we had that's small in America grew to possibly 20% of the population.
Yeah.
And their population is around 91 million. So you're talking about just under 20 million people that are essentially brainwashed cultists and ready to
Essentially, what you're
die
saying,
for it too.
essentially, what you're saying is 70 million people are not
That's
part
right.
of the cult.
70 million people are very innocent.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what Trump's balancing, I think.
But the whole idea that you proposed was here's a no-fly zone. This gives us a buffer so that if you, Mr. Iran, launch some sort of airborne attack, we will have enough advance notice to be able to take it down before it does any damage, either on ourselves, on our allies, or on the ships who are just trying to do commerce through the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah.
It's a pretty simple idea.
Well, it's one that we've executed before. It's not like I came up with this on my own. I was just thinking about the history. You and I both participated in the first Gulf War,
Yes, sir.
and that was a simple solution before and after. Uh, we went in and finished that later, and a lot of us thought that was a kind of a mistake because, face it, Saddam Hussein kept his country under control.
Yeah.
And they were sort of enemies and a buffer between the West and Iran. Because Iran, if you forget, our audience forgets, Iran and Iraq were at odds with one another
Sure, they were for years.
for years. They had a
Well, that's
very
the
vicious
difference,
war.
the Shia versus Sunni Muslims.
Yeah,
And the interesting thing is that Saddam Hussein was neither a Sunni nor a Shia.
right.
He was a Ba'athist,
Yeah,
the Ba'ath Party, and but he did keep a lid on things.
yeah. That's what we have to say about strong men in
Yeah.
countries that you can criticize Putin. Of course, we're talking about Putin before the Ukraine invasion.
Yeah.
Inside his own country, you could give him all the criticism in the world, but you don't know what he's up against with the
Yeah.
different factions within that country and how you have to be basically, hate to say it, a murderous SOB
Yeah.
in order to keep a lid on things.
Well, look at the Shah of Iran in
Yeah.
1978. I mean, he was a strong man and he kept the lid on things. And obviously, people did a great number of people didn't like that, and that's why
Yeah.
we had the rise of the mullahs and the theocracy that followed the Shah of Iran. So, folks, what do you think of Mike's idea? A 500-mile buffer zone, eliminating all the weapons close to the Strait of Hormuz. I think it'll work, Mike.
We'd have to try it and see.
Let's see what the president and his negotiating team come up
We'll
with.
get that off to Dan Muser, okay? You can put it in the ear.
Let's get it to Wyckoff and Jared Kushner and see what they can do with that idea.
The only
I'd love the
contact I
guys-
have is Dan. I mean, Dan
Yeah.
could get it up to the president. We
Well,
talk to him all the time.
Dan's your representative, and
He's not my representative. No, he's just
for a while, wasn't it?
no, never. He was just a friend.
Yeah.
So, he's up there around Reading.
Okay.
So
Well, I guess we'll give that a
they
try.
actually called and asked for my advice during COVID. He was going into a meeting with the president. He knew my background. He said, "You got anything for me?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll give you a few pointers." But it was kind of interesting.
He's an interesting man,
Yeah.
and he's a good member of the United States Congress. I
Yeah,
think
he
he
is.
votes the right way most of the time.
Yeah, and he's one of the few honest men, I think, because he's already wealthy before he went in. He wasn't going in to try and make money. I mean, he's fine. So anyway, we had other subjects we wanted to talk
Well,
about.
let's talk about another idea.
What's the other idea what we were talking about?
Well, here's, Mike, you and I disagree on this.
Oh yeah.
You put forth we had a conversation yesterday, and you put forth the concept, the idea that wouldn't the world be a great place, a much better place, a significantly better place, if we all understood one another's thoughts without any kind of problems, interpretation issues, or without getting someone's motivation incorrect. If we knew what was deep and true and honest in someone's mind, wouldn't it be a better place? Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, it's called a thought experiment. Uh, so you can have a disagreement and there's no way to prove it one way or the other. But I find thought experiments interesting. There are two scenarios, actually. One would be where suddenly today we could all understand each other's thoughts, read each other's minds. Nothing would be hidden. Now, that would cause likely significant problems because we've lived our whole lives harboring secrets and feeling shame and embarrassment. The second scenario is if suddenly the whole world was born that way. If you could imagine a world that's born where there's no misunderstandings, you would know if a person was truly evil or if they had an evil thought, what we call an evil thought about you, exactly why. Was it something in their background, something you said? And if we had that kind of communication, it might be a lot easier to understand each other. And one of the reasons this came to my mind in the first place is we go back to the biblical concept of the Tower of Babel. They all spoke a common language. While they couldn't read each other's minds, there was a whole lot less miscommunication opportunity at that point. And whether you believe in the Bible or not, it's interesting that God says, unless we confuse their language, nothing will be impossible to them. In other words, it's through accurate communication that we can work together and do just amazing things.
Well, whenever I was 12 or 13 years old, Mike, I had this idea that, gee, it would be great if everybody was just like me. And the thought process of everybody being just like me is there would be no misunderstanding. When I said something, the people who were just like me would understand what I meant. They wouldn't be able to misconstrue it. They wouldn't be able to take it inappropriately or take it in a different perspective than what I meant it. I quickly figured out that if everybody was just like me, it would be a pretty boring and pretty ugly and pretty dumb world. And there wouldn't be any kind of advancement of ideas and all those other things. But I use that as an analogy for what you're saying. If everyone knew everyone else's thoughts, again, we're not the Vulcan nation. We're not we're not the Vulcan people. We are American people. We're human beings, and that leads to a whole range of emotions and and various kinds of interpretations because we are different people. You know, the Vulcans were given credit for being that logical group of people, and therefore, you know, what was it? The needs of the many versus the needs of the one, and the whole like that's illogical, you know. And I think I understand your perspective. Being able to read one another's thoughts, being able to understand completely what somebody's saying, would eliminate that misunderstanding. But by the same token, there'd be a lot of negative effects, in my opinion. First, there would never be any surprises. You want to have a surprise birthday party for your kid? Sorry, no can do. You want to have a surprise for your spouse or for your wife? You want to plan a special getaway weekend? Sorry, she's going to know about it as soon as she gets near you to read your thoughts. You want to buy her a special gift? You want to buy her a new engagement ring or a new wedding ring or something like that? Something she don't know. Sorry, no more surprises. And I think that those surprises that go along with caring for one another would be an important loss. But more than that, how many times have we come across where, you know, the old joke about the wife is admiring her new jeans and looking in the mirror and she says, "Dear, do these jeans make my ass look fat?" And, you know, her husband immediately thinks in his own mind, "No, it's your fat ass that makes your fat ass look fat." But he doesn't say that. He says, "Oh, no, dear, the jeans look just fine on you." But she's going to know that he thinks she's got a fat ass. What kind of problems is that going to cause? It's not going to be a good thing. So I guess what I'm saying, Mike, is that, you know, my mom, whenever I was young, she used to explain to me, when you don't want to hurt someone's feelings, and you have one of those little white lies, no damage done, no negative impact to it, but you don't hurt somebody's feelings. When you can read somebody else's mind, there's always going to be hurt feelings. There's going to be maybe not a misunderstanding, but there's going to be angst and there's going to be feelings of unhappiness that go along with knowing someone's intimate thoughts about you or about the circumstance. Do you disagree?
Yeah, it's not that that I don't see your point of view. So it's not so much a disagreement on an ability to understand what you're saying. It's a disagreement on being able to go deep enough because we know logically if this would have happened from birth, if let's say since the creation of man, that nothing was hidden, then these problems wouldn't have arisen. Yeah, there would be no surprises in birthday parties and things like that. But there would be the wife would never ask the question, does my ass look fat in these jeans? Because you'd already know the answer essentially. I think we'd have to go deeper to think about what the ramifications are. Now, the question is, would there still be evil? Obviously, if there's evil, it'd be so easy to recognize that you could separate yourself from those people. But say if we went back to a Garden of Eden type before the sin entered the world, because really a lot of what we're talking about, the embarrassing things that other people might know about, surprise, all these other things, uh, the embarrassing especially is because of the understanding of the knowledge of good and evil. You know, that was the actual forbidden fruit. So if there were no true knowledge of good and evil in the first place, then we wouldn't have anything to hide because there's no such thing as evil. But I do see your point, is what I'm saying, is if evil still is there. Plus,
How are you going to take evil out of human beings, Mike?
well, no, I'm saying imagine a thought experiment where you could go before the enter of sin into humankind. So that's what I mean. Thought experiments and challenges to the thought experiment make us continue to think. So yeah, you know, like since we started talking about this, actually several months ago, we started. It only came up once or twice, and then yesterday more. It caused me to have to refine the thought experiment in my head. So, which is good because that challenges the thought. And then as you were talking, I was thinking, okay, but the if. You know, that's what a thought experiment is, by the way. It's but ifs. So imagine a world where there is no sin. Now, again, we can imagine it both ways. One where there's no sin, which would be much better, obviously, or one where there is sin. And one of the benefits, I'm almost guessing, It's strange to call it a benefit, and this is I'm just thinking out loud right now, so this never dawned on me before. It causes contrast. We were just talking a little bit earlier about the contrast of coming in from the heat into
Yes.
the cool air conditioning. So without the contrast, there isn't very much interesting either, is there? And in some ways, I've heard philosophers say that are either Christian or quasi-Christian, that evil or Satan, the adversary, as he's called from time to time, the accuser of men, is there to set up a contrast. That's linked to the knowledge of good and evil. And so we have two different worlds that we can imagine, one with sin this way, one without. And I said yesterday, what if heaven's like that? There's no sin.
Yeah, again, I don't believe that that's a good thing, Mike. I think that there are times when someone's thoughts ought to be private. Now, as you noted, if we could get to a utopian society or utopian location where there was no evil, where were no evil or bad thoughts. When we were talking about this yesterday, I said to you, do you remember several months ago when Jeffrey Toobin had his incident on the Zoom call with his colleagues, right?
Yep.
So he didn't realize that it was still broadcasting and he began to pleasure himself.
Yeah, for
And,
people that don't remember, that's a good reminder.
yeah, but my point is that because I'm a man
Mhm.
and because I understand what kinds of thoughts go into that desire to want to be pleasured. Something happened in Jeffrey, and I won't be able to explain because I'm not him,
Hmm.
but something happened in his mind that he decided that he wanted to have that outlet. Okay. What I think happens frequently with men is they see a very attractive woman and they think impure thoughts.
Mhm.
And then that leads to the next, follow on steps that happen from there. So, in your scenario, where everyone on that Zoom call who were present would be able to read Jeffrey Toobin's thoughts and know that there was someone on that call that he found, let's say, desirable, sexually desirable. What kind of damage would that be to the individual who was the object of that sexual desire? What kind of damage would that do to the other people on the call that recognizes Toobin's sexual desire? And what could that possibly do to the people, perhaps other women, who are not the object of the sexual desire? Do you understand all the different emotions that are wrapped up in the reading of those thoughts? And then, of course, the embarrassment, the raw physical embarrassment of being observed behaving in that fashion. Now, I think it was CNN, but it was one of I don't remember for sure. I think it was CNN. He was never chastised. He was never fired. He was, I think somebody said, "Hey, you shouldn't do that again." But there were no ramifications or repercussions for his
Well, I
actions.
thought he was fired and hired back. But that aside, we can correct that in post, as they like
Mhm.
to say in the Gutfeld show. But to counter that thought, in the scenario and the way I'm thinking about it, it would Jeffrey Toobin never would have gone that far. And because if you immediately knew what other people were thinking, then you would not allow yourself to go that. He'd already know, she'd already know at some very instant level, so that it never would have escalated to that point. At least the way I'm thinking about it,
But would
my
the
thought
damage have already
experiments.
been done?
Not this, it depends.
When I look at when he looked at the woman and said, "Man, I want to have sex with you," wouldn't that be enough to cause difficulties in the professional relationship?
Well, that was his perception. See, if he knew that there was no interest, I want to sort of cut to the chase on this. So way back in college, we had this uh, mindful meditation class where, and this is back in the '70s, so long time ago. Uh, the professor tried to get us to follow our thoughts back. You ever see the cartoons where there's a bubble where the thoughts come out little bubbles into the big bubble and it finally forms. So the challenge was to follow your thoughts back to try and find the origin of the thought. And the interesting thing is nobody can go all the way back. We can't figure that out. But in an imaginary world, again, thought experiment, I wonder if we had this ability to understand each other perfectly, read minds, emotions, everything. At what level of that thought bubble would that manifest? And how much would that prevent? And again, I'm just thinking out loud now for our audience. Um, how much that would have de-escalated all that to the point where it never would have occurred. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, and when you talk about de-escalation, Mike, I'm not sure. I think it really depends on the thought and the emotion. When I was a younger man, I was prone to anger, and I often let my anger put me in places that I really shouldn't have been. And that was both, with friends and with enemies. And when someone does something to you that you find completely objectionable, and you're a young man full of testosterone, oftentimes you think in your head, I want to kill that guy.
Yeah.
Now, if that thought, I want to kill that guy, was generally interpreted by other people, at what point does someone have to react to that thought, I want to kill that guy? Now, most often, Mike, many times, maybe not most times, but many times, I would, given time to be rational about things, I'd say, okay, Alan, that's an overreaction. You shouldn't be thinking that way. You don't really mean that. But what about in that instant where I'm thinking, I want to kill that guy? What's the reaction of the people who are receiving those thoughts? Do they What kind of standard are they held to make certain that killing emotion, that killing thought doesn't become reality?
I got an answer. So, all right. If you study psychology, you understand that unless you are a psychotic of some sort, a genuinely at the core evil person, the emotions and things that precede our anger, typically the number one is frustration. So the people that I was like you, uh, very similar. I think a lot of young men, as you said, testosterone, we're all thinking we're, you know, going to kill somebody at some point. So the driving force is frustration. So if you could read the frustration before it became escalated, you wouldn't get to the point where you feel like you need to kill the son of a bitch because they would understand, you would understand in some kind of way that we do not understand because we can't read each other's mind. Again, this is what makes a thought experiment so difficult. That you would have sensed the frustration building at that bubbled lower level so that things don't massively blow up.
Well, I disagree that frustration is the primary cause.
Okay.
It could be fear, it could be jealousy. Again, I don't want to all these different thoughts. Um, I have a girlfriend, and I'm with a couple other guys. And this guy, I'm reading his thoughts, and he wants to have sex with my girlfriend. How do I react to that? Because I'll tell you, there was a time in my life when my reaction would not have been friendly or kind. Okay, my reaction would have been violent, and I'm glad if someone thought that way that I didn't know. And I think that having those thoughts be somewhat behind the curtain is a good thing. Did you ever see the movie Minority Report?
Yep.
Okay, so they arrested people before the crime was committed.
Right.
And I think what you're really talking about is something akin to that. And I'm not real sure that we want to live our lives that way.
Well, that's because in that scenario, in that movie, the precogs, as they were called, were not, perfect in their precognition of what was about to happen. Uh, but yeah, what I was saying about frustration, most of the time, we're not talking about the occasional things that you're talking about. But if I take the same thought process and apply it to some guy finding your significant other attractive, first, I think any red-blooded human man would admit that we are attracted to beautiful things.
Yes.
And at that point, again, it's following the bubble back. You would first see maybe that somebody sees somebody as attractive. And then at that point, when you recognize, oh, he finds my wife attractive, he recognizes, oh, he knows I find his wife attractive. The thought process is mitigated.
See, if someone is thinking that they find my wife or my girlfriend attractive, I'm appreciative of that because I know how attractive she is.
So it's only till it gets to that top level.
When it moves over to the next
Right.
step or two and it says, man, I'd like to have sex with that woman, that's where,
That breaks.
yeah, that would lead me to be not friendly.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. I think,
And you're what you're saying is every human being would have the emotional maturity to say, I can't take this to the next step because he'll know.
yeah,
And I'm not.
or not just because he'll know, because he could have empathy enough to put himself in the position as well, that the nature of man would completely change from what it is. Again, I go back to the heaven scenario. If every sin is gone, there's nothing to hide. Like, see, you've always been kind of amazed that I've always said I really wouldn't care if you could read my mind. I know I have sin, but I understand everybody else around me does. I don't think your sin's any better or worse or anything than mine. Um, a friend at work, this goes back 30 some years, used to say, Michael, in whom there is no guile, nothing to be hidden. Didn't know what it meant at the time. It's a biblical phrase from the apostles. But I don't know. I think you've been with me enough in different scenarios that you say I disarm people. I'm like open, I genuinely care. So the more that I think you're that way, the less apt you are to have a problem with this. It's not that I don't ever have thoughts that I withhold, because you just want to. When somebody frustrates me, I won't say who, but when somebody frustrates me, in the past I have lashed out a little bit, just said things not super nasty, but I didn't couch it in a way that was going to be constructive for that person due to my frustration. Not cleaning up after yourself, not participating. Like, if I provide a free place for you to stay, do you think, I wouldn't have to do all this other stuff type scenario? So if they could perceive that, I wouldn't have to say anything. You know what I mean? They'd know before it escalated to the point where I was frustrated.
Well, all I will say is this, Mike. I don't believe we could ever get to the point as human beings where we would have that ability to read each other's minds, to know what people are honestly thinking. And I would restate my position that if that were in fact the case with human beings, that there would be a whole lot more disagreement, a whole lot more hatred, a whole lot more misunderstanding, and a whole lot more of ugliness than exists today when we're allowed to, because we are thoughtful human beings. Mike, I get it. If somebody came to you and said your dog died, or somebody came to you and said you just won $1 million lottery, the impassiveness of your face would not give away your emotions. If your emotions were as easy to read on your face as it would be to read someone's mind, you would have a different experience
Mm.
in life. And what I'm trying to say is there are times, because human beings are not saints, because earth is not heaven, that we need to be able to hide our true feelings, not because we want to lie to people, not because we want to misrepresent, not because we want to hurt people in some way, but the exact opposite is true. Because we don't want to hurt people, because we want to have the ability, using our intellect and our maturity, to not say the first thing that pops into our head, to be able to filter things a little bit, to say the appropriate thing, and not say the first thing that pops into our head. I just think it would be a whole lot different world with a whole lot more misunderstanding and eventually a whole lot more hatred. What do you folks think?
Well, yeah, and before we go, I'll throw one last thing at the folks to consider. We don't have to discuss it, but one of the other scenarios I brought up is, imagine a world in the future where Neurolink, through something like Elon Musk, your thoughts are exposed to the world, but you have a controller over it, kind of like a browser, your privacy settings. You keep some things private, like, the secret surprise party, and other things you would say, well, I want people to be able to understand when I'm starting to become frustrated with them so it doesn't escalate into anger. It's just a thought experiment, again, to for
That's a
people
good
to
thought.
consider.
That's a good thought. Maybe we'll expound on that some other
Yeah,
time.
not enough time today. I guess we're about 40 minutes into it.
Well, there you go.
Should we sum it up and wrap it up?
Wrap it up.
All right. Back at Mike.
Out.
Out.